Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, Aerial Property Advisors, Perfect Building Maintenance. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Avison Young, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Genova Burns, Handro Properties, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investments, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Polsonelli, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, Meringoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
So we have co-working, we have co-living, we have EB5s, we have all these new terms, we have transit-oriented developments, spec office buildings. So what's happening in the area? What are the latest trends taking place? So today I've assembled from the Capital One Bank Pavilion at 299 Park Avenue, I've assembled this group of business and real estate leaders to provide their insight on the market. My guests, they include Mike Maturo, who's the president and CFO of RXR Realty. Ben Stacks, who's the market manager for New York region, including Boston, Capital One Bank. Steve Meringoff, who's the founder and principal of Himmel Meringoff Properties.
Thank you.
And last but not least, joining us from Long Island, Russell Albanese, who's the chairman of the Albanese organization. So what's going on? All of a sudden, transit-oriented development, Garvey's Point, Yonkers, New Rochelle, plus, a couple of office buildings all over.
A few.
Including one right down the block at 237 Park.
Actually, two down the block. 230 Park.
230 and 237.
Right.
So what's going on?
We take a regional approach. We think in terms of solutions, both on the residential and on the commercial side, that you can't just look at New York City, because as we know, there's affordability issues, there's supply issues. And we think to really deal with demand, it has to be a regional play. So our reach is generally 60 miles around Manhattan, including Manhattan. And as we look at those areas, we're involved, as you said, we have 16 million square feet of Class A office space in Manhattan. But we also have a residential portfolio and some office portfolio in the burbs. In the boroughs, and what we call urban suburban. So one thing, we see, and I'm sure gentlemen seated with us today also see, is the demographic is more to urbanization. And there is a transition from the suburbs into more urban environments, downtowns. So what we try to do is follow those trends. And in Manhattan, we followed trends from Midtown to Midtown South, to downtown into the boroughs, and we're working in transit-oriented downtowns like New Rochelle, like Yonkers, like Glen Cove, Hempstead, Stanford, a couple others, where there's reasonable transportation nodes, good commutes on the Metro North from Yonkers and New Rochelle. And what's interesting about it is those areas need an answer to their economic development. As in the 70s and 80s, you had the movement out of the downtowns into office parks and malls and such. And now there's a movement for, as we know, live, work, play environment. And those places like New Rochelle and Yonkers are, can supply that.
If you really want a testament to going into a transit-oriented development of uniqueness, you take Russell. Let's talk about what you did in Wyandanch and what's happening on that.
Well, Wyandanch is a project. We were designated master developer in 2011, where we also try to follow where there's good government and where there's opportunity for public-private partnerships. And we found that in the community of Wyandanch, where the town of Babylon had undergone almost 10 years of master planning, the zoning, land acquisition, put in public infrastructure, and at the time we were designated, the project was almost shovel-ready. Just took about a couple years to finish master planning.
But Wyandanch had other problems. I mean, it had one of the highest crime out in Suffolk County. There wasn't really developments for a number of years.
Wyandanch was a product of segregation from the 50s, the suburban sprawl. Wyandanch never had the kind of infrastructure, the kind of investment until the past 10 years. And so but it's a great location, located right at the train station on the Ronkonkoma line, which is the main line of Long Island. So it was ripe for redevelopment, revitalization, and following substantial public investment provided a very good opportunity, and also one of the most underserved communities. So Cap One was one of our key partners that enabled us to finance our first two buildings through low-income housing tax credits.
And those two buildings were residential rentals, correct?
They were mixed use.
Right, with the retail.
177 apartments, over 35,000 square feet of retail.
You said you're planning to build an office building there now?
We have a commercial building that we're in design on. We have two more residential buildings that we hope to break ground later this year, another couple hundred units. And then there's also a large community development effort getting involved in the schools, the youth center. It goes well beyond the bricks and mortar.
Now, so from Wyandanch, you're also going to the High Line now.
Right, we have both. We look, like all of the gentlemen here, we look for opportunities. We've always been focused in the New York metro area, New Jersey now, and we have a great piece of property on the High Line where we're building a spec office building with Vornado as our partner and a family office, and we're topping out.
Not too far from their property called the Star at Lehigh, right?
Right, right. And actually the design, we have a great architect, Rick Cook, who is a very highly green building, but the building design, the architecture takes some cues from Star at Lehigh, and a new terracotta, curved glass, cool, modern interpretation.
So now we're going to go to a guy who's been in the B buildings for many years, okay, who's made a living in the B buildings, but now and also has a warehouse in Long Island City currently that I think is under
contract.
No, the other one, the existing one.
That's an office building, but we also, it's a mixed-use building. We have the fire department has their main location out in Queens, on Queens Boulevard, which is where this building is.
So what are you doing over there? They were warehouses, and there were no loss factors. Okay, people just use them for warehouses. Now what are you doing? You trying to follow the lead, what they're doing they did at the Standard, and then you also did in Brooklyn?
Yes. We are specialists in B buildings. I always find these panels educational. We don't cut the edge of new trends. We try to basically stick to our own knitting, and Class B buildings is what we've done for 40 years. But uses change, and the needs and the desires of tenants change. People want space that's more accessible, more fun, more open, wider, higher. And so these are the tenants that we are attracting with converted warehouse buildings like the one we're in contract in Long Island City to purchase. And a lot of the space that we had in New York, we've leased to tenants who don't want hung ceilings. And the trend.
Yeah, they want concrete floors, painted concrete floors, no ceilings, open ceilings, you know, and the work area has changed. Now, how do you as a banker, you know, try to adapt to these different trends, different conditions?
You know, following smart people who are experienced in the business and who understand how tastes are changing and uses are changing is really important to us, and we follow our customers. But also, I mean, I think we really look to how people's tastes change and how the uses change, how they experience the property in the different property locations. I would never say that we're, avant-garde in our lending in terms of trying to find new areas. I mean, we're following our tried and true customers.
Right. I mean, you're doing business over here, with Mike in Yonkers over there, which is a different market, okay? But it's in a way, it's a transit-oriented development because it's right on the train, similar. You're doing business with Russ, in Wyandanch on that, and then you're doing business with Steve in other categories. So one of the trends today, that we were talking prior to the show, is the phenomenon of the co-working. How do you, as a bank, and then I'm going to ask the people over here how they look at it. How do you look at the co-working, especially since it's growing by leaps and bounds, and each and every day you hear of WeWork or the Yard or Industrious or somebody else coming into the market, and even Regis right now has signed a concept in Staten Island, which is a totally different market, where they're leasing the entire small building at Lighthouse Point as a co-working.
I think 3 or 4 years ago, we were probably more skeptical than we are now. I mean, I don't think that we would take a single tenant lease on a co-working building and be totally happy with it. But as a tenant that makes up part of a larger building, I think it has a lot of merits. It's a very interesting trend in how work is getting done and how people are changing the environments that they work in. And with the densification of office space all over the city, I think it's a fascinating trend to watch. I mean, one of the really interesting things that I saw recently was that IBM just leased out a whole bunch of WeWork space. And that partnership, I think, is totally fascinating. And that also, I think, really starts to legitimize that business model. And for us, that's a big difference.
You said before you were one of the advocates and the landlords to WeWorks on Park.
Early fan.
Early. But then you did a major development on Times Square. The building used to be called 1460 Broadway, if I'm aging myself.
We rebranded it 8 Times Square, but the office building is still 1460 Broadway, and WeWork occupies the whole building, 130,000 feet. And they are doing very well, full.
Office sharing has been around probably since the 40s. Okay, there were small little places where you had a telephone answering service, and if you went in there, you had to put your card in so you could or your code so you could use the Xerox machine or something like that. It's evolved. I mean, so where do you see the next evolution? Ben just said with the IBM taking space, and a number of companies around the country are using what they call the enterprise system. It's a member concept also. So it's, in a way, it's like the Costco theme of if I can get money as a member, I have a revenue stream coming from a different source that I'm not only dependent on the rents of the property.
WeWork has a different concept. We have Regis Suites in one of our buildings as well. WeWork's concept is to sell a co-joined affiliation of community that allows people to feel like they go to work someplace that they have people who are like them. And that seems to be in high demand. It then has branched out, as you said, into leasing space in larger blocks to companies who just don't want to take a full commitment to a long-term lease, but would rather lease a certain portion of space for a relatively short, flexible period of time. And I think there will always be a need for that type of flex space. the amount of space that they've taken, how big they're going to be, this is something that the future is yet to see. I believe in them as a concept, and they are extremely successful in leasing the space.
Let's get to a different area. You know, each and every day, if you pick up the newspaper, the topic of discussion is retail and the world dying in retail, okay? Everybody's sitting over here, you lend, but everybody sitting over here has retail in your properties over there. How is retail really taking place? What are you seeing? Because one of the comments that somebody said to me yesterday is you're seeing more restaurant retail than you ever did before, and a lot of people, a lot of landlords over the period of time were not in favor of fast casual or even restaurants. Russ?
We have an area in Garden City that we have 8 office buildings along the main corridor, Franklin Avenue, and for years we struggled to rent ground floor space, and then we worked with the village, other landlords, because there was a time there was outdated zoning. There was a time that the village did not allow outdoor dining. There was, it limited the number of restaurants, and that's completely changed the last 10 years. And I think part of more of the urban, where people want to be more connected, they want to be able to have more of the urban feel, to have a walkable community. That's been and I think retail has become more experiential, and I think that's what we've seen, what's been successful in our properties.
I think you were one of the first people to have the barbecue concept, okay, that came into your buildings, right?
I don't know about that. We have a wonderful tenant called Hill Country. They weren't the first to do barbecue.
No, but they weren't the first to do barbecue, but they've really expanded. I mean, they've grown in their business
Yes.
at Madison Square Garden.
They have.
And then if you're talking about urban retail, I think about urban food court, you have
Urban space.
You have urban space, which is, you know,
Done
like 21 vendors
fabulous.
over there that's doing great. And but what are you seeing on your other retail?
Well, I think retail, putting aside, avenue retail, that's a different animal, but retail in floor areas of office buildings, it's more about now amenitizing your office building, what you can offer to your tenant, right? So in urban space, that's an environment at 230 Park where there's not much in terms of an offering for that office building or the office buildings around that area. So you put this urban space in there and it's done phenomenally well. So I think our approach with our retail is how can we amenitize the space in that office building on 237 Park, which we just fully renovated the lobby, and on Depew Avenue, which is the crosswalk there, we have retail along that corridor.
Is most of it food retail?
And that's going to be food retail because, again, that's what is needed to amenitize that office building. So we're choosing between, right now, trying to decide what is the right mix of food retail for that area. It may even be one or maybe just 2 restaurants in there that can amenitize the office space.
How do you, as a banker, look at retail? I mean, food has always been, as the many shows I've done with food people, they say, banks, they take deposits. They don't lend to restaurants.
So I remember 24 or 5 years ago, if somebody brought in a real estate loan request and you had a restaurant and a theater and a bowling alley, and you tried to bring it into credit committee, everybody looked at you like you had 3 heads because there was no credit. They were considered not strong tenants, and so we used to really discount those a lot. Today, that's all you want because the rest of the industry is taking such a, is having such a difficult time. I mean, for us. We've done a lot of research about this. We've really looked into it, and beyond the kind of the New York area stuff, we have some exposure to retail, and I think unfortunately where we are right now is nobody can really tell you where the business is going. There's such disruption going on among Amazon and just the way everybody is experiencing retail and the way people shop and everything else. It's not just Amazon. It's a complete shift in the way the industry is done and experienced by people. I think it's, we're in a very, dicey time in terms of retail overall.
Well, if I could just add, we just leased the retail in that same building office that WeWork has the office to Foot Locker for their headquarters here in flagship store here in New York.
Yeah.
And that was done 2 years ago. We're in the market for a very large retail tenant, a large retail space with smallish retail tenants on the corner of Grand and Broadway in Soho. And I think fundamentally New York is strong in retail, but there's a pricing issue that has to be reconciled. And a lot of these asking rents that were attainable and are still at that high level have to come down in order for tenants to take up what's now a large number and growing number of vacant stores.
And I think that's because of the run-up in property prices over the last, during the cycle. The folks that had bought those properties were asking for much higher rents to justify their purchase prices.
I think that's right.
You have two properties specifically in Times Square neighborhood. Okay, the other building we're
729
7th. There is a question of people saying Times Square is an area that certain people don't want to be in.
I'm sorry.
Don't want to be in. Okay, have you seen that in 729, or because of the mass number of people coming to the city?
Yeah.
The tourists are wonderful and the visitors are wonderful, but it has an effect. I mean, if you try to go to the theater and get a cab, you can't walk the streets.
Sure, it's difficult. Office leasing to some of the larger buildings that are really iconic buildings in Times Square seem to be a little bit on the resistant side for that very reason. We made one of our buildings a theater-oriented building because we thought that would deal with that question. And when we showed WeWork, who had that same kind of thought about Times Square, how many different transportation facilities there were at that. I mean, Times Square is where everything comes together, and that's what they found to be desirable. But for a typical Class A office tenant, it's a little daunting at the moment, I must say.
Another trend which has been around for a number of years, and I don't think you've really utilized it much, is the EB5s. Have you ever utilized EB5 for any of your properties?
We have not. We've looked at it several times. We've always found that, I know it's widely done, but we've always found that a project needs to stand on its own in order to qualify for EB5, and we've never taken it that extra step to...
But a number of EB5 projects specifically, like you mentioned, you're going to be building in Jersey City and Harrison. Those are areas that there has been a number of EB5 credits over there.
Right.
Now, part of the question is, how do you as a bank look at EB5s, which really is a mezz or preferred equity?
I mean, we've done less than a handful of deals on EB5, and it was really based on the underlying sponsorship and making sure that
it was more of the sponsorship as opposed
to... I mean, and making sure that they had substantial equity at risk beyond the EB5 money.
So we've looked into it a number of times. It's a pretty complicated process, and it's one of these processes that if you dedicate yourself to doing it, because you have to develop these regional areas that you kind of work through, it can be very productive. So developers like Extel and Retail that related have very extensive programs, and they've done very well with them. So to do one-off projects, you have to go through one of these regional area people, and what that involves is a lot of process and a lot of cost. So it tends for an individual project not to be that cost effective, as opposed to if you were to develop a more widely used program where you're constantly going back to the market, you become your own regional area, and then you go over there and market direct, right? Because when you go to China, which is where most of the money comes from, you have to do like a syndication of your
you have to have a dog and pony with
so it's
through roadshow and everything.
There's a lot of process there.
So here's the question: as this is the beginning of the new season of the Stoller Report, people always say to me, where are the opportunities? Okay? So where are the opportunities? Where's the next Williamsburg? Where is the next? Is it East New York? Okay, is it Newark? Okay, you're going to Harrison. Newark is partially over there. I mean, Steve Pizicki sold the building to the Chinese investors. No, at one time, no one would ever believe that that would happen in Newark. So where do you see the opportunities, Mr. Meringoff?
In our area of secondary office, we see, truthfully, very, very few opportunities that make economic sense in New York right now. We believe that that will change. Cyclical nature of real estate being what it is, we believe there will be a correction and a shakeout, and we're ready for the opportunities to come back onto the market. But for right now, we don't see much in the way of acquisition opportunities.
So as one person would say, what inning are we in? I don't like that inning concept. Okay, I think we're being held back, okay? We're in suspension as opposed to an inning situation. Mike, where do you see?
Or in extra innings.
Yeah, I mean, well,
Right.
I think that's a good answer because clearly this real estate cycle has lasted much longer than you would generally see. That being said, when you look at New York, and I'll expand that to a broader area of the region, New York's doing very well, right? It continues to attract talent. Companies want to be here. Companies want to extend their footprint here. And I have an interesting story with one of our tenants is Spotify, and they're in 160,000 square feet.
Now they took 400,000.
In 620 Avenue Americas, right? And their leases for another 7 years. They took 400,000 square feet. Well, before they took that space in, I think, 4 World Trade, they met with us and said, we need more space. So we took them to stare at Lehigh. We couldn't quite work the configuration out that they needed. But we said, how do you go from 160,000 to 400,000 people? And they said, we just can't get the talent in Europe. So they're effectively moving their headquarters to New York because that's
bring the right people.
Where the talent is. Just the end of that story, which is more interesting, is that they came back to us recently after signing that lease, and they said they're going to keep the 160,000 square feet in 620 Avenue Americas.
Which basically says that everybody wants to be in New York.
You're hearing the same thing from IBM, from Oracle, from Google. We have Google in our Pier project, 275,000 square feet. That's just an expansion, and they're looking for more space. So I think New York continues to be in a terrific position. And as far as finding opportunities, right now they're not hanging from the trees anymore.
Okay.
But you have to manufacture them, and it's a huge marketplace. And
the world will continue. I'd like to thank Mike, Ben, Steve, I know. Okay. And Russ, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.